Welcome to the Court of History. I'm Sidney Blumenthal. The court is now in session. I am here with Sean Wilentz, my colleague of Princeton University, and this is part two with our guest, Sheldon Whitehouse, senator from Rhode Island, the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's the author of The Scheme, How the Right Wing Used Dark Money to Capture the Supreme Court. He's just fresh from questioning Pam Bondi in an antic episode involving the deprecation of the Office of the Attorney General. But we have discussed that in part one. And now we are going to launch into further questions that carry us forward. We have a situation in American cities where Trump is sending in, or wants to send in, National Guards. He's sent in ICE, which has created provocations in the cities. They're masked, they have no IDs, and Trump has talked about invoking the Insurrection Act. Governor J.B. Pritzker says this is all aimed towards the 2026 election. What's your view?
Well, they've had two bites at the apple so far. The first was when they raided Los Angeles, and a federal judge told them to knock it off because they were violating what's called the Posse Comitatus Act, the law that says you can't use the American military to do policing and law enforcement within the country. They're to protect us from outside enemies, not to be used as a force used against American citizens. So, boom, that went out. Then he sent folks to Oregon and Chicago, and there the challenge was that he had not properly followed the law related to the National Guard and when a president can federalize it and for what purposes. So he's lost two more cases there, and that leaves as his third strike to go to the Insurrection Act, which provides an exception to the Posse Comitatus law where he failed in L.A. So he's not having a great time in court with all of this. And the imagery that's coming back is not all that great for him. But I agree with your suggestion as to what the motive is here. I think they want to create a sense of chaos. They're going out of their way to create confrontation with peaceful protesters so that they can film. They actually, believe it or not, they have videographers walking behind their assault units filming it. And then, of course, they're doing flashbangs and they're doing tear gas and they're doing smoke grenades.
They bring right-wing influencers with them.
They're loving this stuff, and they're creating this imagery of cities in chaos, but you can go 2 blocks in any direction and nobody even knows it's going on because it's really located to where these confrontations are being forced and provoked by Trump's federal officials. So,
they say Chicago is. Yeah, they say Chicago is in a state, should be in a state of insurrection that, justifies invoking the Insurrection Act. But last night I watched the Chicago Cubs-Milwaukee Brewers game at Wrigley Field, and it did not look like that.
No. Well, the Brewers are invading Chicago. That's the only invading force that there is at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And remember Jimmy Kimmel taking the camera around L.A. during the supposed riots and insurrection and rebellion happening there. You could see that as soon as you get away from the provocations that are caused by Trump's federal incursions, everything's perfectly normal.
Yeah. So his Governor Pritzker says he wants to not only get people desensitized to the presence of troops around them, but eventually use them to intimidate voters. And I think that there's something beyond that too, which is what happens after an election when Trump, as he has consistently in the past, claimed that it's rigged when he loses. and attempts to do whatever he does. Can he attempt to seize ballot boxes from the states? What do the states do? What's the legal remedy here?
Well, in the past, the remedy was court proceedings and internal checks by his senior DOJ officials saying that if, this nonsense, for instance, in Georgia that Jeffrey Clark tried to cook up were to be followed by the Whitehouse, there'd be mass departures of everybody senior in the Department of Justice. There'd be a huge mass resignation and a noisy exit, letting everybody know why that happened. Obviously, in a MAGA Department of Justice run by MAGA Pam Bondi, that check is now gone. But you can do a lot of damage before you get around to court proceedings if you've got, armed federal officers going into, for instance, the places where votes are being counted and disrupting what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the counting of the votes and the whole business. I mean, that's the thing that's really scary.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the role of the Supreme Court now. In many of these cases involving all these various issues that Trump has created, the lower federal courts have ruled against him overwhelmingly. And yet when things get to the Supreme Court, at least, on the shadow docket where they, issue rulings without opinions, they've ruled generally in Trump's favor.
Yeah.
90%.
So that's inverse.
It's
not quite 10-1 at the district court level, but it's in that general range, and it's about 10-1 at the Supreme Court shadow docket. Exactly reciprocal opposite.
Yeah, what does this say about the character and composition of the Supreme Court and its, partisan tendencies, and whether or not there's been some corruption there?
Well, as you know, I wrote an entire book on how there's been some corruption there. So that's easy for me to say. What's weird is that the corruption was largely performed at the behest of big traditional right-wing billionaire influencers like the Koch brothers, and heavily focused on polluters who want to break down government and disassemble the administrative state that restricts their ability to pollute for free. So there's been a shift since then to a very different MAGA-based agenda with Trump. And I had actually hoped that the Supreme Court would be more loyal to its House of Koch sponsors and a little bit more skeptical of its House of Trump sponsors. So it's been disappointing to see that happen. I mean, even if you assume that they're captured, which I do, it's like, he's honest, he stays bought. It's like, yeah, but are you for sale to any nutty idea that comes in? The pivot was the immunity decision, because that was just appalling.
Yeah, it was the pivot. But then again, there are elements of this, like the voting rights stuff that's been going on, which is not simply about corruption, but about attacking American democracy, that's been going on for a very long time, long before this court came along, in which the Chief Justice, in fact, was something of a, in the vanguard, shall we say.
Yeah,
and
even before he got to the court.
Exactly. Yeah. So to that extent, what we're seeing is, yes, there is the Koch brothers driven economic stuff, but the attack on democracy really is like, I think it's like the second redemption, trying to overcome the second Reconstruction. What happened in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, they have sworn against that, to undo that for a very long time, which affects not just African Americans, but everybody, because it means the overthrow of American democracy as we know it. So I see this as kind of, two trains running, and they're running in a way that's very, very frightening on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and there's crossover. Look at Citizens United, which I think was decided for the specific purpose of allowing these huge fortunes of creepy billionaires and the trusts that they have set up to deploy billions of dollars of political money, often secretly, into elections so that they can kind of indirectly control government by assisting the election of Republicans who will do what they're told, because the same funders that paid for this $500 million operation to capture the court are also the same ones who are spending $1 billion a year or more to puff up and fund the Republican Party. So all of that, I think, can be fairly attributed to making sure that Republicans control, they knock down the agencies, they let the polluters pollute for free, and there's a huge payback to the folks who funded that in the first instance. But you're right, there's something a little bit more going on when it comes to the Voting Rights Act. That's a particular bee in Robertson's bonnet.
Yeah. Well, the court is facing, for example, in the tariff decision and Trump's use of emergency powers, the split that you described between the House of Koch and the House of Trump. I mean, the House of Koch is financing the suit to overthrow Trump's powers here.
Yeah.
And which side is the court on?
Well, Trump gave a bit of a hint as to what side he wants them to be on when he went on his little peroration against Leonard Leo, which I think Leonard Leo, for people who don't know, is the fixer, the operative, who the Koch brothers and his, billionaire cohort, the ones who are running the billionaire gifts program for Alito and Thomas and all, he's their operative, and he's been working on packing the court for them for decades. And he and an individual holding the office of President Trump's legal counsel, but probably really reporting to the Koch brothers, chose Trump's 3 justices. And I think what provoked Trump to be so angry about this is that somehow it got through his thick ivory that he got played, that these weren't his Supreme Court appointees. These were the Koch brothers' Supreme Court appointees. And he'd let Leonard Leo and Don McGahn tee all this up. And wait a minute, they're not our guys. They're the Koch brothers guys. So there's a seam of conflict between House of Koch and House of Trump right now that I think merits a lot of attention.
Yeah, how compromised do you think the court is here, and how much does the ideological and partisan corruption figure in to what's going to come?
I think it's badly compromised, and I think one of the tells is that the 3 Democrat appointees on the court are really dialing up the invective about what is happening there. One little thing is that it's always the convention at the end of your dissent to say, I respectfully dissent. That's starting to fall out. And instead of just talking about the law, the 3 women who were appointed by Democrats are starting to, in their dissents, discuss the motives of their colleagues and the motives of the folks who are winning these big decisions. They're starting to look outside the narrow bounds of the case itself and look at the political environment in which the decision was rendered. And both of those things are very, very new and suggest that this group of 3 has really come to the realization that this is not just a legit conservative court, that it is part of a political operation, and they're starting to pull their heads up out of the bucket of the case in front of them and start identifying the operation.
Right. And the immunity decision was something of a turning point in all of that, I think. I mean, you really, Sotomayor's dissent there in particular was scolding in a way that I don't even think she had done before. I mean, I think that was the thing that brought it. Very clear.
Look at these guys. They pretend they're originalists. There's nothing originalist about that decision. They pretend that they're textualist. There's no immunity anywhere in the text. They pretend that they carefully follow the Constitution. Yeah, the Constitution has immunity. It has immunity for me. It has immunity for House of Representatives members to protect us from the executive branch, to make sure that our three-part democracy, judiciary, legislative, executive, doesn't come unhinged because of excessive executive power brought to bear on individual legislators. And in the same provision that they talked about immunity for us, they could have said, oh, by the way, we'll throw in some presidential immunity too. And here's another tell. Our immunity ends at treason. The immunity that Roberts and his gang of six cooked up for Trump doesn't even exempt treason.
No, they have no qualifications on it, do they?
No, not
There's
at all.
no limit to the immunity.
Yeah. So here we are. We're in a government shutdown. And Russell Voigt, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, has declared time for the RIFs, the reductions in forces, which he's long planned through his Project 2025, the illegal firing of federal employees. He's already engaged in illegal impoundment. What happens here? I mean, we're in the twilight zone in terms of the law, in what they're doing and using a shutdown to go further.
We're in the twilight zone. First of all, people have to understand who Ross Vogt is. He is a weirdo who has been essentially on the payroll of creepy billionaires who want to interfere with the government all his professional life. And he has a peculiar lust for traumatizing federal employees, that's his own word, and for destroying federal agencies, which is just what the big polluters and the big corporate entities want. They want to, as it was once famously said, they want a federal government so small they can drown it like a baby in the bathtub, and it can't stop their cheating, and it can't stop their polluting, and it can't tell them what to do. So this is a very unusual person who I think takes real delight in the harm that he's about to cause. Now, what you're seeing is some pushback. You know, Republican senators, Republican House members are starting to say, wait a minute, do we want to own the behavior of this weirdo when we have to go and get ourselves reelected, when it's our own phony baloney jobs that are on the line, as they said in Blazing Saddles? So there'll be some pushback from that, and the public ultimately gets the vote. And we'll have to just see how wildly irresponsible he is. A short stop on that is going to be the appropriations process. If that moves forward, then that starts to close out some of Vogt's authority, and it gives us the opportunity to build legal guardrails to make sure that he can't impound the money or use rescission to undo the money. And there's some bipartisan bills that haven't been brought to the floor yet, but they have some of those guardrails in them. So interestingly, there's some bipartisan pushback on what he's trying to do in the Senate. And there's some real anxiety in both the House and the Senate on the Republican side that he's going to go too far in his delight and perverse relish in causing pain. He and Steve Miller are cut from the same cloth, the people who enjoy pain.
Yeah, they like to.
For that it's called sadism, I believe. But there it is.
That would be the clinical word for it.
Right. Bureaucracy, whatever. You got to put the word bureaucracy.
Yeah, right. Bureaucrato-sadism. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, they're very interesting cases of ideological zealots who cross the lines of politics that will harm themselves and their patron in the end because of their zealotry.
Yeah. Think of the evil viziers that are serving the dumb sultans in children's stories and movies. You know, people are familiar with that notion, the creepy, clever commissar to the brutal dictator, the wily vizier who's doing damage on behalf of the dopey sultan.
Yeah. The impoundments are really interesting because the Republican Congress has just been completely passive in the face of the usurpation of its constitutional power. Robert Byrd, the great constitutionalist from West Virginia, this Democratic Senate leader, used to sue all the time on questions of impoundment, and he would win. And he had standing because he was a member of the Congress and felt violated. And he did have standing. It's an interesting.
Well, that standing has been chopped away by the court.
Yeah. It's a very interesting situation that we have here. Well, Senator Whitehouse, thank you very much for appearing with us on this episode of the Court of History. We wish you good night and good luck.
Who said that?
Edward R. Murrow.
I know.
A different CBS.
A different CBS, a different.
Yes, not Barry Weiss. No, not at all.
No, it did not pay money to Joe McCarthy. That CBS. We urge all the listeners to subscribe to Legal AF. On behalf of Sean Wilentz and myself, this episode of the Court of History is adjourned.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.